The wind in Wyoming did not bother asking permission. It simply took what it wanted. It stole the heat from a man's blood and the hope from his mind, leaving behind a hard, cold silence that echoed the high, empty plains. Eli Hart knew that silence. He had lived inside it for 5 years, in a stone cell where the only horizon was a slit of gray sky. He had been out for 3 months, but the prison still clung to him like alkali dust. It was in the way he moved, with a quiet economy of motion, as if still navigating a 6x8 space. It was in the way he watched everything and said nothing. His horse, a tough-hided roan named Bolo, was all he had. They moved south, keeping the Bighorn Mountains to their west, following no map. Prison had burned the plans right out of him. Now, he just moved. He survived on rabbits and grouse, his rifle a heavy comfort across his saddle. The scars on his knuckles were from men, but the scars on his face were from the life he had lived before, running cattle in a war that was never his. He had taken the fall for other men. That was the long and short of it. He had kept his mouth shut, served his time, and walked out with nothing but the clothes he wore and a bitterness so deep it tasted like rust. He was looking for a place to stop, a place where the wind was the only thing screaming. He found it 10 miles outside a small settlement that huddled around a white-spired church. The ranch was a skeleton. A fire had gutted the main house, leaving charred beams standing like blackened teeth against the snow-dusted hills. The roof was gone, a dark hole open to the sky. Only a smaller cabin, likely the original homestead, and a large barn seemed untouched by the flames. Eli sat on Bolo for a long time, watching the plume of smoke that rose thin and steady from the cabin's stone chimney. Smoke meant people. People meant trouble. But the barn meant work, and work meant a roof. The cold was setting in, the kind that promised a deep snow. He was tired of sleeping on frozen ground. He nudged the horse forward, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol, a habit he could not break. A woman emerged from the cabin as he approached. She carried a shotgun angled at the ground, but she held it like she knew how to raise it. She was perhaps 40, with a face carved by sun and worry. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She did not look impressed. She looked burdened. "Keep riding," she said. Her voice was flat. "Ma'am, I am looking for work. I see you got need of it." Eli gestured at the burned-out house. "I got no money to pay." "I do not need money. I need a place to stay out of the wind. I am good with my hands. I can fix that roof before the snow collapses what is left. I can mend your corrals." He paused. "I ask only for board, a place in the barn, whatever scraps you can spare." She studied him. Her eyes were sharp, taking in his worn clothes, the prison pallor beneath his beard, and the way his eyes never quite settled on hers, instead scanning the tree line, the barn roof, the shadows. "You look like trouble," she said, not as an insult, but as a fact. "Trouble is what I am trying to get away from, ma'am." "What is your name?" "Eli Hart." She considered this. The shotgun did not lower. "I am Mabel. This is my land. The work is hard and the food is plain. You sleep in the barn. You stay out of the house. You do the work I set, and you get a roof and 1 hot meal a day. You cause me 1 ounce of grief. You are gone. Understood?" "Understood," Eli said. He swung down from Bolo, his movement stiff from the cold. "Hay is in the loft for your horse. Water trough is frozen. The axe is by the wood pile. Break the ice," she ordered. Then she turned and walked back to the cabin without another word. Eli led Bolo toward the barn, the smell of charred pine and wet ash heavy in the air. He felt the weight of the woman's gaze on his back until the cabin door shut, the sound final. He worked for 3 days in the biting cold. He chopped wood for her stove, repaired the sagging gate on the main corral, and began the slow work of clearing the debris from the burned house. He was methodical. He salvaged what he could. Joists that were only scorched, hinges that could be oiled, stone from the collapsed chimney that could be reused. He worked from sunup to sundown, his hands splitting and bleeding in the dry air. He slept in the hayloft, wrapping himself in his bedroll. It was warmer than the open plains, and the scent of the hay was clean. Mabel kept her word. Every evening, she would open the cabin door and leave a tin plate of food on the porch, stew, mostly, thick with potatoes and the occasional piece of tough meat. She never spoke to him. He never spoke to her. The silence was part of their bargain. But he knew he was not alone. He had seen them on the first day, just a flicker of movement behind the cabin's single-glass window. 2 young women. The first he saw gathering eggs from the chicken coop on the second morning. She was maybe 20. When she looked up and saw him standing by the wood pile, she froze. She was lovely, in a way that hurt to look at. Her hair was the color of pale corn silk, and her face was fine-boned and serious, but it was her stillness that caught him. She was, he recognized, deeply restrained, holding herself together as if a strong wind might scatter her. She grabbed the basket and hurried back inside, her head down. The second one was younger, perhaps 17 or 18. She was the one who watched him from the window. She was smaller, darker-haired, and she moved with a quick, bird-like caution. But unlike the first, her gaze was direct. She would stand half-hidden by the curtain and just watch him. He would be splitting logs, and he would feel the weight of her eyes. When he looked up, she would not flinch or hide. She just watched. Her face was a sharp, intelligent triangle, but her lips were always pressed shut. He had been there 3 days and had not heard a sound from her. She was, he realized, mute. On the 4th day, Mabel came to the barn while he was reshoeing Bolo. Mr. Hart, she said, and the formality made him tense. Ma'am. He kept his head down, focused on the hoof. You have seen the girls? It was not a question. I have seen them. Lorna is the elder. Elsie is the younger. They are my half-sisters. Their folks passed 2 years back. I am all they have. She paused, and the air in the barn felt suddenly colder. They are not ready for town life. They are simple, delicate. They stay on this ranch for a reason. He hammered the last nail and dropped the hoof. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his trousers. That is none of my business, Mabel. You make sure it stays that way. You are here to work. You are not here to talk. You are not here to get friendly. You do not speak to them. You do not look at them. You keep to the barn and the burn pile. Is that clear? Eli met her gaze. He saw the hard lines of a woman who had been fighting the world alone for a long time. He saw fear. It is clear, he said. The town, the one Mabel called a settlement, was a single muddy street with a general store, a saloon, a smithy, and the tall white church that seemed to judge everything below it. Eli rode in on the 5th day, Bolo pulling a rickety wagon. Mabel had given him a short list: sacks of flour, salt, nails, and 3 lengths of canvas for patching the barn roof. He kept his head down, but he felt the stares. A strange rider on a burned-out widow's wagon was cause for gossip. The store was warm, smelling of coffee beans and cured tobacco. "Help you?" the proprietor asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "List from Mabel at the old Miller place," Eli said, sliding the paper across the counter. The man's eyebrows rose. "Mabel? She finally hired help, did she? Figured she would run herself into the ground before she did that." Eli said nothing, just stood by the counter. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and 2 men. They were cowhands, smelling of the saloon. One of them, a thick-set man with a cattle foreman's air of authority, stopped when he saw Eli. The man, Silas, squinted. His eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I will be," the foreman said, his voice loud in the small store. "Eli Hart? I thought they buried you in Laramie." Eli did not move. "Hello, Silas." "Heard you got sent up for that business with the bar tea," Silas announced to the store. "Took the fall for Creedlow's rustlers, did you not?" The proprietor stopped loading the flour sack. I served my time, Eli said, his voice low. You served your time, Silas mocked. Stepping closer, he was trying to get a rise out of him, to prove his own standing. And now you are back. What is the matter? Heart? Could not find honest work. So you went to hide out with the widow and those two strange girls she keeps locked up? Eli's hands slowly curled into fists at his sides. He could smell the sour whiskey on the man's breath. He said nothing. He is a jailbird, Silas said to the proprietor, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the sawdust by the stove. You best count your stock, old man, and Mabel better lock her doors. That is enough, Silas, the proprietor said nervously, looking at Eli's face. Eli turned, forcing his fists to uncurl. He laid the few coins Mabel had given him on the counter. Load the wagon. He walked out of the store, the foreman's laughter following him into the street. He loaded the sacks, his movements jerky with contained rage. He knew what this meant. The whispers would start. The brand was fresh again. He was not Eli Hart, a man. He was a convict, a jailbird, a threat. He drove the wagon back to the ranch, the wind stinging his eyes. He felt the phantom weight of the prison walls settling around him again. That night the snow came. It was not a gentle snow. It was a howling Wyoming blizzard that descended from the mountains like a white wolf, erasing the world. The wind screamed, rattling the old barn doors. Eli checked on Bolo, adding more hay to his stall. The cold was a physical thing, a presence in the barn that bit through his coat and his bedroll. He was sitting in the hayloft, his back against a post, trying to rub some life back into his frozen feet, when he heard a sound. It was not the wind, it was the creak of the barn's side door. He tensed, his hand moving to the knife on his belt. He peered down from the loft into the shadows. It was Elsie, the younger sister. She stood frozen in the doorway, a gust of snow whirling around her. She was just a silhouette against the driving white. She held something in her arms. She took one step inside and pushed the door shut, plunging the barn back into near darkness, lit only by the faint light of the moon through the frosted hayloft window. He could hear her breathing, quick and panicked, from the floor below. He did not move. He did not want to scare her. He stayed silent, hidden in the shadows of the loft. She stood there for a long minute, letting her eyes adjust. She looked toward Bolo's stall. Then she looked up. He knew the moment she saw him. Her breath caught. Eli slowly raised a hand. "It is all right," he whispered. "I am not coming down." She did not run. She just watched him. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the quick calculation. She was holding a thick quilt. She took a hesitant step toward the ladder to the loft, then stopped. She looked at the ladder, then at him. She was afraid, not of him, he realized, but of the climb, of being cornered. She stepped back and walked to the base of the ladder. She carefully folded the quilt and placed it on the bottom rung. Then she looked up at him again. She raised one hand, her fingers small and chapped, and pointed at the quilt, then at him. "Thank you," Eli said, his voice rough. She nodded once, a quick, jerky motion. She started to turn back to the door. "Elsie," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. She stopped, her back to him. "You should not be out in this. Your sister will worry." She turned. Her face was pale in the gloom. She looked at him, and he felt the force of her silent gaze. It was not pity, it was understanding. She knew what it was to be cold. She took one step toward him. She was close enough now that he could see the snowflakes melting in her dark hair. She reached out one hand, very slowly, and laid her gloved fingers on his forearm. It was the briefest touch, just a moment of pressure, a connection. Then, as silently as she had arrived, she was gone. The side door opened, the wind howled, and she slipped out into the white. Eli stared at the space where she had been. He waited a minute before climbing down. He picked up the quilt. It was old and heavy, smelling faintly of cedar and wood smoke. He carried it back to the loft and wrapped it around himself. It was the warmest he had been in 5 years. The snow lasted 2 days. When it finally stopped, the world was buried and silent. The burned-out house looked like a ruin from another time, its charred beams capped in white. Eli spent the morning digging a path from the cabin to the barn, and another to the chicken coop. He was back at the main house in the afternoon, pulling down a section of roof that threatened to collapse under the weight of the snow. The wood was slick with ice. He was balancing on a high beam, prying a warped rafter loose with a crowbar, when the wood beneath his boot cracked. He fell. It was not a long fall, maybe 8 feet, but he landed badly. He crashed through the weakened floorboards of the second story and plunged into the debris-filled kitchen below. He landed on his side, a sharp, searing pain shooting through his shoulder as a heavy, half-burned beam rolled onto him, pinning his arm. He lay there for a moment, stunned. The air knocked out of him. The dust of ash and plaster filled his lungs. He tried to move his arm and cried out. The pain was white-hot. "Mr. Hart," he heard the voice from far away. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. Lorna, the older sister. She was standing at the edge of the collapsed hole, her face pale with shock. "My arm," he grunted, trying to push the beam. "It is pinned." She disappeared. He heard her scrambling down the pile of debris at the far end of the room. She was wearing only a thin shawl over her dress, her feet wet from the snow. "We have to move it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She grabbed one end of the beam. Eli set his good hand against it. "On 3, he gasped. 1, 2, 3. They both heaved. The beam was heavy, waterlogged and solid. It rolled just enough for him to wrench his arm free. He fell back, panting, cradling his left arm. His sleeve was torn, and blood was already soaking through the fabric. "You are bleeding," she whispered. "It is just a cut. The beam. It hit a spike." "Can you stand?" He nodded, biting back the pain. He used the wall to pull himself up. He was dizzy. "Come to the house," she said, not asking. "Mabel is not here. She rode out to check the snares before the snow got too deep. You must let me clean that." He wanted to refuse. He wanted to go back to the barn, back to the cold safety of his own space. But he was hurt, and she was already leading the way, holding the cabin door open. He had never been inside. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and suffocatingly warm from the cast-iron stove. It smelled of baking bread and dried herbs. Elsie was there, sitting at the small table, and she jumped to her feet when she saw him, her eyes wide with fear, a small gasp escaping her lips. "It is all right, Elsie," Lorna said, her voice gentle. "He is hurt. Get me the water basin, and the lye soap." Elsie moved quickly, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. "Sit," Lorna ordered Eli. He sat at the table, his arm throbbing. He felt huge and clumsy in the small, feminine space. Elsie put the basin on the table, her eyes fixed on the blood, and then she backed away to the far corner of the room, watching. Lorna returned with scissors and cut his sleeve away. The gash was deep, running 4 inches along his forearm, bleeding freely. It was scraped raw from the fall. "This will sting," she said. She was not gentle like her sister. Her hands were practical, her movements efficient as she washed the wound with the harsh soap and warm water. He winced, sucking air through his teeth. "Hold still," she commanded. She dried the skin and wrapped it tightly with a strip of clean linen. Her fingers brushed his skin, and the touch was electric, entirely different from Elsie's. It was hesitant, nervous, but alive. "It needs stitches," she said quietly, tying off the bandage. "It will heal. I heal fast." She finished her work and finally looked at his face. Her eyes were a pale, clear blue, and they were filled with a profound, echoing sadness. He recognized it. It was the same thing he saw in the mirror. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Lorna," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Lorna." They sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds, the crackle of the stove and the ticking of a small clock on the mantel. Elsie had not moved from the corner. "It is lonely out here," Lorna said, looking down at her hands, which were now stained with his blood. "Yes, ma'am, it is." She looked up, and her gaze was fearless. "What was it like, in prison?" The question hit him like a physical blow. No one had asked him that. They had accused him, whispered about him, but no one had asked. He looked past her, at the small, frosted window. "It is quiet," he said, the words coming slow. "Even when it is loud, it is quiet. The walls, they get inside you. You forget what it feels like to look at something far away. And it is never dark enough to really sleep." She held his gaze, and he knew she understood. She was living in her own prison. The burned-out ranch, her sister's silence, Mabel's fear. "I know that quiet," she whispered. The cabin door swung open. Mabel stood there, her face hard as stone. She looked at Eli sitting at her table, at Lorna standing too close, at the bloodied rags. "Get out," she hissed at Eli. "Get back to the barn." "He was hurt, Mabel," Lorna said, standing straighter. "A beam fell." "I said, get out." Mabel took a step toward him. "I told you the rules." Eli stood up. "She was just fixing my arm, ma'am." "I do not care. You stay away from them?" Eli nodded once. He looked at Lorna, who was watching Mabel with a new defiance in her eyes. Then he looked at Elsie, who was pressed so far into the corner she seemed to be part of the shadows. He walked out, back into the cleansing cold, the bandage on his arm tight and warm. That night, he could not sleep. The pain in his shoulder was bad, but it was the memory of Lorna's eyes that kept him awake. He was drifting in a shallow, painful doze when he heard it again. A cry. He sat up in the hay. It was not the wind. It was human. It was coming from the cabin. He climbed down and moved through the snow, keeping to the shadows. He stopped by the cabin wall, near the small window he knew was theirs. The sound was clearer now. It was Elsie. She was not screaming, but making a low, terrified sound, like a trapped animal. He crept closer, until he could see into the dim room. The two sisters shared a bed. Lorna was sitting up, holding Elsie, rocking her. Elsie was curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears, her body shaking. She was having a nightmare. "It is all right, Elsie girl," Lorna was murmuring, her voice thick with sleep. "He is not here. You are safe. I am here. You are safe." Eli watched for a long moment. He saw the way Lorna held her sister, a gesture both protective and desperate. He saw the raw terror in Elsie's posture, even in her sleep. He backed away. Retreating to the barn, he felt like an intruder, a witness to a grief he had no right to see. He knew fear, and he knew pain. But this was something older and deeper. The next day, the sun was bright on the snow. The air was crisp. Eli was testing the strength of the barn roof when he heard the horse. A man was riding up the track. He was not a working rancher. He rode a fine black gelding with a silver inlaid saddle. His coat was expensive, made of thick wool with a beaver pelt collar, and his hat was clean. He pulled up in front of the cabin and dismounted, not bothering to tie his horse, as if he expected someone else to do it. He was handsome, in a way that Eli distrusted. His face was smooth, his mustache neatly trimmed. Mabel came out onto the porch. "Bernard, we were not expecting you." "I come when I please. Mabel, you know that." His voice was smooth, but carried an edge of cruelty. Lorna appeared in the doorway behind Mabel. When she saw the man, all the light and life drained from her. She went pale, her hand gripping the doorframe. The man, Bernard, smiled when he saw her, It was not a kind smile. "Lorna, my sweet, you look thin. This place is not agreeing with you." He stepped onto the porch. He ignored Mabel and reached for Lorna, brushing his gloved hand down her arm. She flinched. "Do not do that," Mabel said. Bernard laughed. "She is to be my wife. I can touch her if I like." From the barn roof, Eli watched. He saw the way Lorna's face was a mask of polite terror. Bernard's gaze then fell on Eli. He squinted up at him. "Who is this?" "Hired man," Mabel said quickly. "For the repairs." "A hired man?" Bernard looked Eli up and down with open contempt. "Since when do you have coin for hired men, Mabel?" He looked back at Lorna, his smile widening. "Do not you worry. My dear, I will be coming to take you soon. We will have the wedding before spring. This ranch is falling apart. It is time you were in a proper home." Lorna said nothing. She looked like she was choking. Bernard Clay tipped his hat to her, his eyes lingering on her body. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, whistling. Eli stayed on the roof until the man was a speck in the distance. He felt the old, familiar rage building in his chest, cold and heavy. He climbed down. Mabel was waiting for him by the woodpile. Her face was ashen, her hands clenched in her apron. "You saw him," she said. "I saw him." "That is Bernard Clay. His family owns half the valley. The church elder. He is to marry Lorna." Eli looked at the cabin, where Lorna had vanished back inside. "Mabel," he said, his voice quiet. "She is terrified of him." Mabel's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a desperate, hot fear. "You listen to me, Mr. Hart. You are a ghost here. You do not see, you do not hear, and you do not speak. You think Silas in town is trouble? You have no idea what trouble is. Trouble is Bernard Clay. If he thinks for 1 second you are interfering, if he even thinks you are looking at her, he will not just run you off. He will destroy us. He will destroy them. Do you understand me?" She was breathing hard, her whole body trembling. She was not warning him. She was pleading. "Stay away from my sisters," she whispered, "or you will bring the whole world down on us." Eli looked at his bandaged arm, then at the house where 2 women were trapped in a silence far deeper than his own. He nodded. "I understand," he said. He picked up his axe and turned toward the woods, sinking into the deep snow. He needed to hit something. He needed to split wood until his good arm ached. And the rage went quiet. And he was just a man in the cold again. But he knew it was too late. He was already involved. Bernard Clay's venom moved faster than a prairie fire. He did not just go to town. He went to war. He spoke to Silas, his words careful, painting a picture of a decent man worried for his fiancée's virtue. He had a longer, quieter meeting with Reverend Pike, framing his concern in the language of faith, of a soul in peril. The poison worked. By the time Eli drove the wagon into town for winter feed 2 days later, the air had changed. It was not just the cold. The few people on the muddy street stopped to stare. Their faces were not curious. They were hard, set in judgment. When he stepped into the general store, the 6 men gathered around the stove fell silent. The proprietor, a man named Peters, looked at his feet. "Just the feed, Peters, and the salt," Eli said, his voice quiet. "We do not want your kind here." A voice cut through the silence. It was Silas, the foreman. He was standing with 2 other ranch hands. "I'm just here for supplies," Eli said, keeping his back to the counter, his eyes on the men. "Mr. Clay told us what you are," Silas said, stepping forward. He was a bully, but now he had the town's approval. "He told us how you were living out there. A convict, in a barn, preying on that poor girl." "You do not know what you are talking about. Silas, I know what I see. A jailbird sniffing around a decent, God-fearing woman. Mr. Clay is her fiancé. He is protecting her. and we are protecting our town." Reverend Pike came in. He was a thin man with a gaze that seemed to miss nothing and forgive nothing. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light. "Hey, Mr. Hart," the preacher said, and his voice was the cold scrape of metal. "This is a moral community. We abide by the word of God. We do not tolerate the serpent in our garden." "Reverend, I have done nothing." "Mr. Clay is a pillar of this town. He has expressed his righteous concern. He found you, alone, with his intended, a woman he is pledged to protect, and you, a man fresh from prison, have insinuated yourself into a house of vulnerable women." The other men in the store grunted in agreement. "Fornicator," one of them whispered. "You are not welcome here." "Hart," Silas said, his hand on the pistol at his belt. "You are not welcome in this store. You are not welcome in this town. You are a blight. Take your wagon and get out, and do not come back." Eli looked at their faces. He saw no mercy. He saw only the hard, unthinking righteousness of men who had found an easy target. He remembered this feeling from prison, the feeling of being boxed in, of having his story told for him by men who held all the power. There was no winning. There was only enduring. He turned slowly. He had no feed, no salt. He walked out of the store, every eye a brand on his back. He climbed onto the wagon seat. "And if we see you near Lorna Clay again," Pike called out, his voice carrying across the street, "we will see you horsewhipped." Eli did not look back. He drove the empty wagon out of town, the humiliation a cold, hard knot in his gut. He was not just an outcast. He was a threat. And they had given Bernard Clay the one thing he needed, the town's permission. He returned to the ranch with a dark, quiet rage simmering in him. He unhitched the wagon and led Bolo to the barn, his movements stiff. He needed to hit something. He grabbed an axe and went to the woods, to a stand of thick pines that needed clearing. He swung the axe, the rhythm of the work the only thing that could quiet his mind. The thud of steel into wood was a release. He worked for an hour, the sweat freezing on his brow, until his good arm ached. He was splitting a thick log when he heard a sound, a sniffle. He stopped, axe in hand. He looked around. Lorna was there, sitting on a fallen tree 20 yards away, half hidden by the brush. She was clutching her thin shawl, her shoulders shaking. She had been crying, her face blotchy and raw. He lowered the axe. "You should not be out here. You will catch your death." "I saw them," she whispered, her voice broken. "I rode up to the ridge. I saw them in town, shouting at you." "It is nothing," Eli said, turning back to the log. "It is not nothing," she cried, standing up. "It is me. This is my fault. He is doing this because of me. He is doing this because he is a bully, Lorna." "No." She walked toward him, her hands clenched. "You do not understand. He is not a bully. He is an owner. He owns me." Eli stopped. He looked at her. The fear he had seen in her before was gone, replaced by a stark, desperate honesty. "What do you mean, he owns you?" She broke. The words came tumbling out, a confession she had held inside for years. "It is not just an engagement. It is a trap. My father, he was not a good man. He gambled. He owed Bernard's father a lot of money. When he died, the debt fell to Mabel. She has been working this ranch to death, trying to pay it." "A debt," Eli said. "So he is buying you." "No," she shook her head, fresh tears spilling. "It is worse than that. It is not the money. He would forgive the money. It is a secret." She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. "Years ago," she whispered, staring at the snow. When she stopped speaking, it was not a sickness. It's because of them, the Clays." Eli went cold. He looked at her, and the pieces began to fit. Elsie's terror, the dark drawings. "What did they do?" he asked, his voice low. "Bernard's father Lorna choked on the name. He hurt her. He was visiting. She was just a child. I found her. She was broken. And she never spoke again. Not one word. Eli's hand tightened on the axe handle. My father, Lorna continued. He wanted to go to the law, but Bernard's father was the most powerful man in the county. He threatened to ruin us. And then Bernard stepped in. He was young, but he was just as cruel. He said he would handle it. He said he would protect our family's name and his... She was sobbing openly now. He helped cover it up. He paid a doctor to say Elsie was simple-minded from a fever. He moved us out here to this ranch, away from town, to protect us. He bought my father's silence. And when my father died, he inherited the secret. He holds it over us, over me. If I do not marry him, he will tell everyone, but he will not tell the truth. He will tell a lie. He will say Elsie is damaged, that I am damaged, that we are unwell. He will ruin us. He will have us put away. He will use the town, the church. They already listen to him. She looked at him, her eyes a raw plea. Do you see? He does not want me. He wants to own the silence. He wants to own her. She gestured toward the cabin. And marrying me is the price. He owns my name. He owns my story, and he will never, ever let me go. Eli stood there, the axe heavy in his hand. He understood now. This was not a prison he could break out of. It was a web of lies and shame, and Bernard Clay was the spider at its center. He had no words. He just stood there as she cried, a silent witness to a pain he could not heal. The next few days were quiet, but it was the quiet of a pulled-back hammer. Eli kept his distance. Mabel was short-tempered, rationing the food they did not have. Lorna was a ghost, her face pale and her eyes vacant. Only Elsie seemed unchanged. She still watched him. He was repairing a hole in the barn wall, his fingers numb from the cold. When he felt her presence, he turned. She was standing in the doorway, holding a small, flat piece of bark. She did not smile. She just looked at him, and then gestured with her head. Come. He was not supposed to talk to her. He was not supposed to look at her. But after what Lorna had told him, Mabel's rules seemed small. He put down his hammer and followed her. She led him past the corrals, to a place he had not seen, a small cluster of willows that sheltered a frozen creek bed. It was hidden from the house. It was her place. Tucked inside a hollow, fallen log, were her things, pieces of charcoal, and dozens of sketches, drawn on scraps of wood, dried leaves, and flat stones. He knelt, his breath catching. They were not drawings. They were a testament. He saw the ranch, the burned-out house. He saw a picture of Mabel, her face tight with worry. He saw Lorna, standing by a window, looking like a bird in a cage. Then he saw the dark ones. A drawing of a small girl, curled in a black corner. A drawing of a tall, faceless man, his hands like claws. A drawing of a wolf with sharp, white teeth and Bernard Clay's eyes. It was a map of her pain, laid bare. He looked at Elsie. She was watching his face, her own expression terrified, as if showing him this was the biggest risk she had ever taken. He pointed to the drawing of the wolf. He looked at her, his eyes asking the question. She nodded, her small face grim. She picked up a piece of charcoal on the smooth, white bark of a log. She drew a picture of a man, a stick figure, but the anger in it was clear, standing over a small girl, his hand raised. Eli felt the rage rise in him again, cold and clean. He looked at her, at this small, silent girl who carried this horror inside her. He gently touched the drawing of the caged bird that was Lorna. Then he pointed at Elsie. She looked at the drawing, then at him. She shook her head. She picked up the charcoal and drew a new picture, a bird with a broken wing, sitting on the frozen ground. He met her gaze. He wanted to tell her he understood. He wanted to tell her he would protect her, but he had no words. He just nodded. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, for the first time, a small, sad smile touched her lips. She trusted him. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise 3 days later. A low, sick yellow pressed down on the plains. Eli, smelling the air, knew what it was. "A blizzard," he told Mabel. "A bad one. We need to bring the stock in close." They worked all afternoon. Eli herding the few cows into the barn, Mabel and Lorna gathering every last piece of firewood. The air was deathly still. Just as the first hard pellets of snow began to sting the air, a rider appeared. Bernard Clay. He dismounted, not bothering to look at Eli. He pushed his way past Mabel on the porch. "A storm is coming," he announced, as if they were fools. "I cannot have my fiancé left alone with him." He jutted his chin at Eli. "I will wait it out here." "You are not welcome, Bernard," Mabel said, her voice shaking. "This ranch is my collateral. Mabel, that makes it my property. I will stay where I please." He was carrying a bottle of whiskey. He walked into the cabin and sat at the table. The storm hit like a fist. The wind did not howl. It shrieked. Snow blotted out the world in a solid, swirling white. They were trapped. The cabin was suffocating. Mabel, Lorna, and Elsie in the main room, Bernard at the table, drinking steadily. Eli was banished to the barn. He sat in the hayloft, the quilt Elsie had given him wrapped tight, listening to the wind try to tear the building apart. Hours passed. The storm only worsened. He knew, deep down, that he should be in the house. Late in the night, he heard a sound that was not the wind, a shout. He climbed down, pulled on his coat, and tied a rope from the barn door to the cabin porch, fighting the wind and snow every step. He could barely see. He reached the cabin. He heard a crash. He did not knock. He threw the door open. The room was in chaos. A chair was overturned. Bernard, his face flushed with whiskey, had Lorna backed into a corner. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. He had her by the arms, and he was trying to kiss her, his body pressing her against the wall. "You will learn to like it, Lorna," he was snarling. "You are mine." "No, let me go! Bernard, stop!" She was sobbing, fighting him. Mabel was on the floor. He had shoved her. Elsie was in the bedroom doorway, frozen, a silent scream on her face. When Eli burst in, Bernard spun around. "You!" Eli did not say a word. The time for words was over. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He hit Bernard with all the force of his prison-bred rage. The sound of the blow was a wet, solid crack. Bernard stumbled back, surprised. He was a bully, not a fighter. He raised his fists. Eli hit him again and again. He hit him for Lorna's tears, for Elsie's silence, for the humiliation in town, for the 5 years he had lost. He did not stop until Bernard slumped to the floor, gurgling, and smashed his head against the stone hearth. Bernard lay still, a dark line of blood matting his hair. Lorna was on the floor, huddled, crying. Elsie had not moved. Mabel was pulling herself up, her face white. She looked at Eli, his chest heaving, his knuckles split. She looked at Bernard, then she looked at Lorna. A change came over her. The fear that had ruled her life snapped. "Get him up," she ordered Eli, her voice like ice. Eli hauled the groaning Bernard to his feet. You will hang for this. Heart," Bernard spat, blood in his teeth. "Get out of my house," Mabel said. "It is a blizzard," Bernard shrieked. "You cannot! You will kill me!" "You lay your hands on my sister again, Bernard, and I will kill you myself. I do not care about the debt. I do not care about the town. You are done here." "Mabel, he will freeze," Eli said, the rage cooling. "The woodshed," Mabel said. "He can have the woodshed.
but he is out of this house."
Eli nodded. He dragged Bernard by the collar, out into the screaming white hell of the storm, and threw him into the small, dark shed. He barred the door from the outside. He returned to the cabin, shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. The 3 women were huddled by the fire. He was one of them now. He had crossed the line. Mabel poured him a cup of coffee. Her hands were steady. "You broke your word, Mr. Hart," she said quietly. He was hurting her. Mabel nodded, staring into the flames. "I know. I have been a coward, so afraid of him, of what he knows, of what people will say." She looked at him, her eyes old and tired. "You need to know what you are in. You need to know why I have been so afraid. The good people in town, the Reverend, they all look down on me. They whisper about me. They know what I was." Lorna, who had been crying silently, looked up. "Mabel, you do not have to." "Yes, I do," Mabel said. "He is part of this now. He has a right to know the ground he is standing on. I was not always a rancher's widow. Before I met Mr. Miller, I worked in Laramie, in a saloon. They called us saloon girls." She said the words with a flat, hard shame. "I sang. I poured drinks. I did what I had to do, to eat, to send money back here for my mother and these 2. I have spent every day since I married Mr. Miller trying to scrub that clean, trying to be respectable, trying to protect them from that life, from men like him, men who see women as something to be bought, or used, or broken. I tried to keep you away, Mr. Hart, because I know that look. I thought you were one of them. I thought you would bring that world here." She looked at him, her gaze unflinching. "I was wrong." The storm trapped them for another day. Eli stayed in the cabin, sitting on a stool by the door. He was the guard. He and Mabel checked on Bernard twice. He was alive, miserable and furious in the woodshed, but alive. Late that night, the wind began to die. Mabel and Elsie were asleep in the bedroom. Lorna was standing at the window, watching the last of the snow swirl in the moonlight. The world was white and silent. Eli stood up and walked over to her. "Is your head all right? Where he hit you?" She did not turn. "It is fine. I have felt worse." She paused. "I have never seen anyone do that for me. Not ever. He had no right." "He thinks he has every right," she whispered. She turned to face him. Her face was pale in the stormlight. Her eyes shadowed. "You will have to leave. After this, he will bring the whole town back. He will have you arrested." "I know. Where will you go?" "It does not matter. South, I suppose." She looked at him, and he saw the caged bird he had seen in Elsie's drawings. She was trembling. "Thank you, Eli." She reached up, her hand shaking, and touched the bruise on his cheek. Her fingers were cold. "Lorna," he started to say, but she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss of desperation. It was cold and frantic, full of fear and a sudden, sharp gratitude. He tasted the salt of her tears. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. The first real human warmth he had felt in years. He felt her whole body trembling in his arms. Then, just as suddenly as she had started, she tore herself away. She shoved him back, her eyes wide with shame and horror. "No, I cannot." She backed away, her hand over her mouth. I am promised. Oh, God, what am I doing?" She turned and fled into the bedroom, pulling the curtain shut, leaving Eli alone in the moonlight, his heart pounding, the ghost of her kiss burning on his lips. He did not sleep. He sat by the door until the first gray light of morning. He was exhausted, confused. He must have dozed, because he was startled awake by a touch. He opened his eyes. Elsie was kneeling beside his cot. The cabin was silent. She was looking at him, her face full of a serious, probing intensity. She looked at the bruise on his jaw. She looked at his split knuckles. She looked at his lips, where Lorna had kissed him. She reached out one small, chapped hand and very, very gently touched his face. Her fingers were light, tracing the bruise. He lay perfectly still. "Elsie?" he whispered. Her eyes searched his. She looked terrified, but determined. Her lips parted. She tried to make a sound. A small, breathy ee escaped. It was a failure. Her face crumpled in frustration. Tears welled in her eyes. And then she leaned forward. She pressed her lips to his. It was nothing like Lorna's kiss. It was not a kiss of passion or desperation. It was as light as a snowflake. A simple, chaste press of her mouth to his. It was a thank you. It was a secret. It was the only way she knew how to speak. She pulled back, her face bright red. Before he could move or think or even breathe, she scrambled to her feet, pulled the cabin door open, and ran out into the bright, frozen morning. Eli sat up, stunned. His mind was reeling. Lorna's desperate, hungry kiss. Elsie's silent, trusting one. He felt a profound, aching guilt. He did not know what either of them meant. He did not know what they needed from him. He only knew that he was tangled in their lives in a way that he could never undo. He stood, pulling on his boots, and opened the door to the blinding white snow. Mabel was standing on the porch. She had a bucket of feed. She had been on her way to the woodshed. She had seen Elsie run out. She saw the look of stunned confusion on Eli's face. Her face went pale. What did you do?" she whispered. "Mabel, I did not. It was not. She was in there with you." Her voice was shaking, rising. "She ran out. What did you do to her?" "Nothing. She was—" "You liar!" The word was a slap. Then her hand followed. She hit him, a hard, sharp crack across his face. "I took you in!" she screamed, all her fear and rage finally breaking loose. "I gave you shelter. I fed you. And this is how— You come into my home. You— First Lorna. Now her? You put your hands on both of them?" Lorna was at the door now, her face white. "Mabel, stop! It was not his fault!" "You!" Mabel rounded on her. "I saw you, kissing him at the window like a tramp. Did you think I was blind?" She turned back to Eli, her anger collapsing into a terrible, shuddering sob. She grabbed his shirt. "They are not just girls," she wept, shaking him. "They are not innocent. They are not simple. They have been hurt. They have survived things. Mr. Hart, terrible things, things that broke them. And you saw that. You saw that brokenness, and you used it. You are just like him. You are just like all of them." She let go, sinking onto the porch step, burying her face in her hands. "God help us," she cried. "You have doomed us all." The accusation hung in the frozen air, brittle and cruel. Eli stood on the porch, the sting of Mabel's hand on his face a dull throb against the grater, colder ache inside him. Lorna was in the doorway, frozen, her hand over her mouth. Mabel was a heap of broken pride on the steps, her sobs the only sound in the white, snow-bright morning. "It was not like that," Eli said, his voice flat, exhausted. He was not talking about the kiss. He was talking about the accusation. "Mabel, it was not—" "Mabel, he saved me," Lorna whispered, her voice cracking. "Last night, he saved me from Bernard. And Elsie, she was just thanking him. That is all." Mabel looked up, her face a ruin of tears and shame. She seemed to see, for the first time, the man she had just struck. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the split knuckles from defending her home, the raw hurt from her words. "Oh God," she whispered, not in prayer, but in defeat. She wiped her face with her apron. "What have I done?" "We have to deal with him," Eli said, pulling his coat tighter. He pointed to the woodshed. "The storm is over. He will be half frozen, but he is mean enough to have survived."
"Let him freeze,"
Lorna said, her voice a sliver of ice. "No," Mabel said, standing up on shaky legs. She was the matriarch again, even if she was broken. "We are not murderers. Let him out. Let him go. Let the world have him back." Eli walked to the woodshed. The bar was frozen solid. He had to kick it loose. When he pulled the door open, Bernard Clay spilled out, falling to his knees in the snow. He was a mess of blue-lipped misery, his expensive coat covered in filth, his head bleeding from where he had hit the hearth. He looked up, his eyes meeting Eli's, and the look was not gratitude. It was pure, unholy hatred.
"You are a dead man. Heart," Bernard hissed, his teeth chattering. "All of you. You will burn for this. I will see this place burn to the ground. I will see you, all of you,
in the gutter." "Get your horse," Eli said, unhitching the gelding, "and ride." Bernard staggered to his horse, pulling himself into the saddle with a groan. He looked at the three of them, Eli, Mabel, Lorna, standing like soldiers at a funeral. "You will regret this, Mabel," he spat. "You will regret letting this filth touch her." He pointed a shaking finger at Lorna. "She is mine. She is my property, and I will collect what is mine." He dug his heels into the horse and rode off, a dark, furious speck against the blinding white. They watched him go. The silence he left behind was worse than the storm. "He will be back," Mabel said, stating a fact. "He will not come alone."
"Let him come,"
Lorna said, but there was no fight in her voice, only exhaustion. They went inside. The next 2 days were a kind of purgatory. They were trapped together by the deep snow, but separated by the things they had done and seen. Eli slept on his cot, but he felt the presence of the two women in the next room, their shared breath, their shared secrets. He felt like a stray wolf that had been allowed inside, but he knew he did not belong. He chopped wood. He cleared the paths. He did not speak unless spoken to. On the 3rd day, a rider came. It was not Bernard, it was Deacon Harris. From the church, a man whose face was set in permanent disapproval. He did not dismount. He rode up to the porch, where Mabel stood, her arms crossed. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice carrying in the cold. He would not look at Eli, who was standing by the barn. "Deacon, the town council has met. Reverend Pike has expressed the Lord's deep concern, as has Mr. Clay, a man of considerable patience, who has been grievously wronged." "Wronged?" Mabel's voice was dangerously quiet. "You have taken a convict into your home, ma'am, a man of known sin, a violent man, and you have allowed him to interfere with the sanctity of a God-given betrothal. You have put yourself and your wards in spiritual peril. You are a blight on this community." He reached into his coat and produced a letter. "The church holds the note on this land. Mrs. Miller, you have been in arrears for 2 years. Mr. Clay was kind enough to stay our hand. He is no longer so inclined." He tossed the letter onto the porch. "This is a notice of eviction. You are harboring a felon and dishonoring God. You have 10 days to remove the man Hart from your property and to present Lorna in town for her marital vows. If you fail, the sheriff will remove you all by force. The property will be forfeit." He turned his horse. "May God have mercy on your souls." He rode away. Lorna came out and picked up the letter. She read it, her face turning the color of ash. Eli walked over. He took the paper from her trembling hands. It said everything the deacon had said, in cold, legal language. It was signed by Reverend Pike and the town judge.
"He has done it,"
Lorna whispered. "He has turned the whole town against us." That night, the cabin felt like a tomb. The letter sat on the table. Mabel stared at it. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white.
Eli,
She said, her voice a dry rasp.
Lorna told me. She told you about Elsie, about Bernard's father. She did.
Eli stood by the stove. He felt the need to be on his feet, to be ready. Mabel let out a long, slow breath.
She does not know the whole truth. She thinks it was just him. She thinks it was a secret.
Eli waited.
It was not a secret,
Mabel said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear.
It was a convenience.
She looked up, her eyes black with a grief so old it was part of her bones.
When I found Elsie, after old man Clay was done with her, I took her to the doctor. He gave me laudanum and told me to keep her quiet. I went to the sheriff. He told me, Mr. Clay was a good man, a generous man, and that girls get flighty ideas.
He said he would not have his name slandered. She was not crying. She was far past tears.
I went to Reverend Pike, she continued. I thought the church. I begged him. I told him what that man did to my sister, to a child. And he told me to pray. He told me that some children are born with a darkness in them, that they invite sin, and that to speak of it, to accuse a good man, would be a greater sin than the act itself. He said it would ruin Elsie, that no man would ever have her, that she would be tainted. He told me it was God's will.
Eli felt a cold sickness rise in his throat.
Old man Clay did not just own the bank, Mabel whispered. He owned the church. He owned the law. He owned their souls. And when he died, Bernard inherited it all. He does not just hold a secret about his father, Mr. Hart. He holds the town's secret. They are not just on his side because he is rich. They are on his side because they have to be. To protect him is to protect themselves from their own damnation. They cannot let Elsie or us speak the truth. They would rather see us dead than see their own sin brought into the light. Now Eli understood. The eviction, the humiliation. It was not justice. It was a cover-up, a town-wide conspiracy to silence a child.
We cannot stay here, Eli said, the words tasting like gravel.
We cannot fight them. They are not just men. They are a mob, wearing God's clothes.
He looked at Mabel, then at Lorna, who was staring into the fire.
We have to leave. Tonight, I can get us to Cheyenne. I have some money I buried before. It is not much, but it is enough to get on a train. We can go north, to the territories, or west, anywhere but here.
He started to move, to plan. We can take the 3 horses. We pack light. They will not expect us to run into the snow. Mabel looked up, a flicker of something, not hope, but possibility.
No,
Lorna said.
Eli stopped. Lorna, they will take you. They will throw your sister and Mabel into the snow, and they will drag you to that church. I know.
Her voice was flat.
And I will not run.
Why? Eli demanded.
You would rather marry that monster? No, she said, turning to him, her eyes fierce and terrified. I would rather die, but I will not see Elsie hunted. You do not know him. If we run, what do you think he will do? He will not just let us go. He cannot. Elsie, she is the one who knows. She is the one who saw. He will not hunt me. Eli, he will hunt her.
She was right. The blood in Eli's veins turned to ice.
He will put a bounty on her, Lorna said, her voice breaking. He will tell the law she is mad. He will say she is a danger, that she ran off. He will have men like Silas, track her down, and he will not bring her back here. He will have her put in an asylum. He will have her locked in a dark room where no one can ever hear her. Even if she did scream, he will erase her. I will not let that happen. I will not let her be hunted because of me. She looked at her hands. I will marry him, if that is the price. To keep her safe, to let Mabel keep the ranch. That is the only bargain I have left to make.
The cabin was silent. The trap had sprung. It was perfect, and it was complete. The next few days were the quietest Eli had ever known. A quiet thick with despair. Lorna's decision, unspoken, hung over them. Mabel seemed to shrink, the fight gone out of her. And Elsie watched. She had seen the man with the letter. She had felt the fear in the cabin. She knew. Eli was in the barn, trying to mend a piece of harness, his fingers clumsy and numb. He was useless. He was a fighter with his hands tied. He reached for his bedroll and his fingers brushed a piece of paper. It was not there before. He pulled it out. It was a scrap of brown wrapping paper. On it, in shaky letters drawn with a piece of charcoal, was a single word. Him. He looked around. Elsie was gone. He found the next note the following morning, tucked into the handle of the barn door. Not sick, the old one. He made the hurt. She was telling him. She was confirming what he already knew. She was finally, in her own way, speaking. He found the third note later that day, wedged into the woodpile. This one was harder to read. The charcoal was smeared, as if by tears. Their house, the dark room. B, put me in. He said I was bad. He said be quiet. No one hears. I made the quiet. I keep it. Eli read the note 3 times. His vision blurred. It was not just the father. It was Bernard. Bernard had taken a terrified, brutalized child and locked her in the dark. He had trained her to be silent. He had buried her alive. The quiet, simmering rage in Eli's chest turned into something cold and sharp. He was no longer just angry. He was ready. He did not know what he would do, but he knew that he would not let Lorna go to that man. He would not let Elsie be threatened by him. He would die here first. That night, the cold snapped, the temperature plummeted, and the stars in the sky looked like chips of ice. They were running out of time. The eviction notice gave them 4 more days. Eli was in the barn, rubbing Bolo down. He could not stand the silence of the cabin, the heavy weight of their surrender. The side door creaked. It was Lorna. She was wrapped in a thick quilt. Mabel is asleep, she whispered. She did not move from the doorway. You should not be here, Lorna, he said, his voice rough. If Mabel sees... I do not care. I do not care about any of it anymore. I am so tired. She walked toward him, moving through the shadows until she was close enough to touch. The lantern light caught the tears on her cheeks. I am going to do it, she said, her voice flat. Tomorrow. I am going to ride into town. I am going to tell Reverend Pike that I will marry Bernard. That is the only way. To save Elsie. To save this land for Mabel. No, Eli said. You cannot. It is a life sentence. It is the only one I have to give, she whispered. I am already a prisoner. Eli, I have been since the day he first looked at me. At least this way. I am choosing the cell. I am buying their safety with the only thing I have left. He looked at her. He saw no fear, only a profound, bottomless sacrifice. It was awful, and it was magnificent. You are not a coward, Lorna, he said, his voice thick. She let out a small, broken sound. Yes, I am. I am terrified. But I wanted one night, one moment, before I am his. I want one moment that is mine. She stepped into him, her hands on his chest, and looked up at him. He cannot have all of me, Eli. He can have my name. He can have my body. But he cannot have this. He cannot have the part of me that is me. She was crying, silent tears tracking down her face. I do not want to be alone tonight. He put his arms around her. He pulled her close. This was not the frantic, ashamed kiss from the storm. This was slow and deep and full of a terrible, shared grief. It was a goodbye. It was the only comfort 2 broken people could offer each other in a world that was trying to tear them apart. His hands went to her hair, pulling the pins loose. Her hands clutched his shirt, as if he were the only solid thing on earth. It was desperate. It was emotional. It was a blaze of warmth against the killing cold. He pulled her toward the hayloft, needing to be closer, needing to forget the town, and the letter, and the man who was coming for her. They stumbled onto the hay, a tangle of limbs and sorrow. He was over her, kissing her face, her neck, the tears on her cheeks. And then she stopped him. She put her hands flat on his chest and pushed, gently but firmly. "No," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs.
"I cannot, Eli, I cannot."
He pulled back, breathing hard, confused.
"If I do this,"
she wept, turning her face away. "If I give this to you, I will have nothing left. He wins. He takes everything. This last part of me, it has to stay mine. It is the only thing I own." He understood. It was the last line of her defense, the final piece of her soul that she would not surrender, not even to someone she cared for, not even for comfort. He did not argue. He did not plead. He just accepted. He sat up, pulled her to his chest, and just held her. He wrapped the quilt around them both, and she wept into his shirt. A long, silent, racking grief. A shadow fell across the hay. A small sound, a creak of a floorboard. Lobna gasped and pulled away from him. Elsie was standing at the top of the loft ladder. She was in her thin white nightdress, her dark hair wild. Her face was not angry. It was not jealous. It was an expression of such profound, absolute heartbreak that it stopped Eli's breath. She had seen them. She had seen the kisses, the embrace, her two protectors, the man who took her notes, the sister who had sworn to die for her. And they had, in her mind, chosen each other. They had left her. She looked at Lorna, then at Eli. Her face crumpled. She turned and scrambled down the ladder.
"Elsie!"
Lorna screamed, scrambling to her feet.
"No, it is not! Elsie, wait!"
Elsie hit the barn floor and ran. She threw open the big barn doors and disappeared into the freezing moonlit night. "Get your coat!" Eli yelled, jumping down from the loft. "She is in her nightdress! She will die!" He grabbed his own heavy coat and the lantern. Lorna was right behind him, pulling her boots on, sobbing. They ran out into the snow. The moon was high and bright, making the world a stark landscape of black and white. They could see her tracks, small, bare feet, heading not for the house, but for the woods.
"Elsie!"
Lorna screamed, her voice tearing.
"Elsie, come back, please. It is not what you think."
They followed the tracks, running, stumbling through the drifts. The cold was a physical pain, stinging Eli's lungs. "She thinks we left her," Lorna panted, tears freezing on her face.
"She thinks we are together, that we... Oh, God, she is all alone."
"She went to her place," Eli said, grabbing Lorna's arm.
"The creek, the hollow log."
They crashed through the underbrush, following the trail. They found her. She was not in the log. She was at the edge of the frozen creek, a small, white heap in the snow. She had just curled up. She had given up.
"No!"
Lorna wailed, falling to her knees beside her.
"No, Elsie, no!"
Eli was there in a second. He touched her. She was covered in frost. Her skin was waxy, her lips blue. He could not feel her breathing. "No," he whispered. He ripped his heavy sheepskin coat off, ignoring the bite of the air. He scooped her up. She was terrifyingly light, a frozen doll. He wrapped the coat around her small, stiff body, holding her tight against his own chest, trying to force his life, his warmth, into her. "Go!" he yelled at Lorna. "Get back to the house. Get every blanket. Get the fire as hot as it will go. Run!" Lorna, galvanized by his command, scrambled up and ran toward the cabin. Eli followed, holding the small girl, whispering to her, "It is all right, little bird.
It is all right. I got you. You are not alone. You are not alone. He burst into the cabin. Mabel, woken by Lorna's cries, was standing there, her face a mask of terror. "The bed," Eli commanded. "Get the blankets." He laid Elsie on the mattress. She was so still. Lorna and Mabel were stripping the frozen nightdress from her, their hands shaking. They piled every quilt and blanket they owned on top of her. "It is not enough," Eli said, his teeth chattering. "She is too cold. We have to give her our warmth." Mabel and Lorna stared at him. "I know what I am saying," he said, his voice desperate. He climbed onto the narrow bed, on one side of Elsie's small, cold form. He pulled her against him. "Lorna, get on the other side, now!" Lorna did not hesitate. She climbed in, pressing her body against her sister's back, creating a cocoon of human warmth. They lay there, Eli on one side, Lorna on the other, the small, cold body of Elsie between them. No one spoke. The cabin was silent save for Lorna's choked sobs and Mabel's whispered prayers. It was not passion. It was not sin. It was life. It was just breath and warmth and the desperate, silent plea for her to stay. They lay like that for hours. Mabel sat in the chair, watching, her face gray. Just before dawn, Eli felt it, a twitch, a small, shuddering breath. Elsie mumbled, her head moving, burrowing into his chest. She was warm. Lorna let out a sound, half sob, half laugh. She was asleep, her arm flung protectively over Elsie's waist. Eli waited another hour. Elsie's breathing was deep and even. He carefully slid out from the bed, pulling the blankets tight around the two sisters, who were now clinging to each other in their sleep. He was exhausted, his body aching, his soul scraped raw. Mabel was at the table. She had not moved. She looked up at him as he stoked the fire. "She is warm," Eli whispered. "She is breathing right. She is back." Mabel nodded once, the tears finally coming, tracking silently down her worn face. "You saved her, after all I said. You saved her." "We saved her," he said. He poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands shaking. He sat down across from her. The gray morning light filled the small room. He had to tell her. He owed her the truth. "Mabel," he said, looking at his cup, When you accused me of using them, you were wrong. But I did not understand what I was feeling. I still do not." He looked toward the bedroom, where the two sisters were sleeping. I care for Lorna. I see her strength, and her fire, and how she stands up, even when she is breaking, and I want to stand with her. I want to be her shield." He paused, the words heavy, hard to find. "And then I see Elsie, and it is not the same. It is something else. It is just as strong. I want to give her my own voice. I want to take every blow the world has for her. I want to just keep her safe." He finally looked up, meeting Mabel's tired gaze. His heart was bare. "I think I love them both, Mabel, and I do not know what that makes me. I do not know how it is possible. It feels true, and it feels like a sin." Mabel looked at him for a long time. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a vast, empty resignation. She nodded once, slowly. "Love," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "In this world, it is just another way to bleed. Mr. Hart." She looked down at her own chapped hands. "It does not matter. What you feel, what I feel, it changes nothing. Lorna will still have to marry him. The town will still come. There is no place for whatever this is." She sounded so final. She pushed herself up from the table, her movements stiff. I need to make the fire, for the girls. It is cold." "Mabel, let me,"
Eli said, standing.
No. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I will do it. It is my house. I will take care of my family.
She walked to the stove. She picked up a piece of kindling and the box of matches. She stopped. She made a small sound, a little grunt of surprise. She put her hand to her chest. "Mabel," Eli said. She turned. Her eyes were wide, looking at him, but seeing something far away. Her expression was not fear. It was confusion. She collapsed. She fell to the kitchen floor, the kindling scattering around her. "Mabel!" Eli shouted, lunging forward. Lorna burst from the bedroom, her face wild with sleep.
What is it?"
Eli was on his knees, turning Mabel over. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. He put his ear to her chest, listening, praying. Nothing. He looked up at Lorna, his voice breaking.
"She is gone. Lorna, she is gone."
Lorna's hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a sound that was not a word. It was a scream of pure, torn-apart grief. Behind her, Elsie appeared. She saw her sister screaming. She saw Eli on the floor, and she saw the still, empty body of the woman who had been her mother, her protector, her only anchor. Elsie's face contorted. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in 10 years, a sound came out. It was not a word. It was a high, thin, terrible wail of pure, animal anguish, a sound of a soul breaking in two. The wail tore through the thin morning air, a sound not heard in a decade. It was the sound of a snapped cord, of a soul that had been held quiet for so long that its first noise was one of pure, shattering agony. Lorna was frozen, her scream stuck in her throat, staring at Mabel's still form. Eli was on his knees, his hand still on Mabel's chest, feeling the absolute, final absence of life. It was Elsie's cry that broke the spell. The sound propelled Eli to his feet. He was the only one moving. He was the only one not broken by a grief he had no right to claim. "Lorna," he said, his voice a harsh rasp. He grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the body. "Lana, go to your sister." Elsie was in the doorway, her small body rigid, her hands clenched at her sides, the wail having ripped out of her. She was silent again, but it was not the old silence. This was a new, terrible, empty quiet. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Lorna, moving like a woman in a dream, stumbled to Elsie and wrapped her arms around her. The two of them stood locked together, two halves of a whole, staring at the woman who had been their only wall against the world. "We cannot leave her here," Eli said, his voice rough. He looked at Mabel, her eyes open to the ceiling, a look of simple confusion on her face. He gently closed them. He could not, it felt wrong. He was a stranger.
"Help me, Lorna,"
he whispered. He lifted Mabel's shoulders.
"Lorna,"
her face a mask of numb horror, took her mother's feet. Together, they carried her into the bedroom and laid her on the bed. They covered her with the quilt. And then the true desolation began. There was no one to tell them what to do. There was no one to make the coffee. There was no one to stoke the fire. The cabin grew cold. Eli knew what had to be done. He went outside, to the barn, and found the pickaxe and the shovel. The frozen ground fought him. Digging a grave in Wyoming winter was like trying to chip a hole in iron. He chose a spot on the small rise behind the cabin, under a lone, leafless cottonwood. It was a place Mabel had liked to look at. He worked for hours. Every swing of the pickaxe was a blow against his own failure. He had come here for shelter and had brought nothing but ruin. He had failed to protect them. He had failed to save Mabel. The cold bit at him, but he did not feel it. He felt only the rhythmic, punishing labor. Behind him, he heard Lorna reading. She was in the cabin, her voice a monotone, reading from Mabel's Bible. He could not make out the words. He only heard the sound, a low, desperate drone against the wind. When the hole was finally deep enough, he went back. "It is time," he said. They wrapped her in her best blanket. They had no coffin. Eli carried her. Lorna and Elsie followed, clinging to each other. They stood by the hole. The sky was a hard, pale gray. "Say the words, Lorna," Eli said quietly. Lorna shook her head, her throat working. I cannot." Eli looked at the woman in his arms. He had known her only a short time. She had been hard and afraid and fierce. She had deserved better. "You gave us shelter," he said to the body, the words torn from him. You were a good woman. You were strong. May you find peace." He lowered her into the ground. He took the shovel. The first fall of frozen dirt on the blanket was the cruelest sound he had ever heard. Lorna flinched, burying her face in Elsie's hair. Elsie did not move. She just watched, her eyes black and bottomless, as Eli buried the last person who had ever truly protected her. When it was done, a small, raw mound of earth, Eli threw the shovel down. Lorna finally spoke, her voice dead. "What do we do now?" Before Eli could answer, a voice, smooth and cold, cut across the hill. "You will do as you are told. Lorna, that is what you will do." Bernard Clay was sitting on his black gelding at the edge of the property. He was not alone. Sheriff Brody was beside him, and Silas, the foreman, was just behind. They had not come to grieve. They had come to collect. "You are not welcome here, Bernard," Lorna said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold rage. "That is where you are wrong, my dear." Bernard dismounted, pulling a folded paper from his coat. He walked toward them, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped a few feet from the fresh grave, his gaze dismissive. "Mabel is gone," he said simply. "A pity. It makes things simpler. According to this," he waved the paper, "I am your legal guardian." "What?" Lorna's head snapped up. "That is a lie. It is not. Your father, in his wisdom, signed a great many papers. This one assigns guardianship of both you and your simple sister to me. In the event of Mabel's death, it was to secure his debts. I am, in the eyes of the law, responsible for you. This ranch, this land, it is all mine, to manage on your behalf. Of course," he smiled. "And as your guardian, I have decided it is time for you to marry. A woman needs a husband to guide her, especially now." You forged that," Lorna whispered, horrified. "The judge's seal says otherwise," Bernard said, handing the paper to Brody, who nodded grimly. "It is all in order." "You will not touch her," Eli said. He stepped in front of Lorna and Elsie, his body a shield. Bernard looked at him, his smile fading. He looked at Eli's dirt-caked hands, his sweat-stained shirt. "Hart, you are still here. I thought I told you to be gone." "This is not your land. These are not your wards. You will leave." "I do not think so." Bernard nodded at the sheriff. "Brody, this man is trespassing. He is a known convict, and he has been threatening my fiancée. He is clearly a danger. I want him removed." Sheriff Brody did not bother with questions. He and Silas moved at the same time. Eli had no chance to resist. He was exhausted from digging the grave, his heart heavy. Silas grabbed his arms from behind. "You cannot do this!" Lorna screamed. Eli struggled, but Brody hit him hard in the stomach with his club. Eli folded, gasping. "Resisting an officer of the law," Brody said, his voice bored. He looped a rope around Eli's wrists. "You beat a man for nothing?" Eli spat, the taste of bile in his mouth. "He is not a man," Bernard said, walking over. He looked down at Eli, who was on his knees. "He is a convict, and he is in my way." Bernard looked at Silas. "Teach him a lesson about interfering." Silas did not need to be told twice. He hit Eli, a closed fist to the jaw that snapped his head back. Eli fell onto his side. Silas kicked him in the ribs.
"Stop it!"
Lorna shrieked, rushing forward. Bernard caught her, his grip like steel on her arm.
"Be still.
Lorna, this is what happens to vermin that get in the house. Watch, learn." Silas kicked Eli again. Eli curled up, protecting his head. He did not make a sound. He just took it. He knew what this was. It was a demonstration of power.
"That is enough, Silas,"
Brody said, not out of mercy, but impatience.
"We will take him in."
They hauled Eli to his feet. He was bleeding from his mouth, his ribs on fire. They tied his feet and threw him over his own horse. Bolo. "Eli!" Lorna cried, struggling against Bernard. Eli looked at her. Her face was a blur of terror. He saw Elsie behind her, still as stone, her black eyes watching every blow, every humiliation. Her face was a mask of cold, clear hatred. "You are making a mistake, Brody," Eli grunted. "The only mistake was letting you out of Laramie, jailbird." Brody said. He mounted his horse. "You will sit in my cell until the circuit judge comes through, and I will make sure he knows you assaulted Mr. Clay and his intended." They rode off, leading Eli's horse, leaving him trussed like an animal. He watched the ranch disappear, the fresh grave a raw scar on the land. He had failed. He was back where he started, in a cage, back at the ranch. Bernard shoved Lorna toward the cabin. "Now," he said, his voice stripped of its smooth charm, "we will have no more nonsense. You will pack. You will move into town with Mrs. Pike. The wedding is in 2 days. Elsie can stay here. She can clean up." Lorna stumbled, but she did not fall. The fight had gone out of her. Mabel was dead. Eli was gone. She was alone. She looked at Elsie, who was still standing by the grave, a small, dark statue in the snow. Bernard went into the cabin. He opened the bottle of whiskey he had left there. He sat at the table. He had won. Elsie did not come inside. She waited until the sun began to sink. She waited until she heard the sound of Bernard snoring. Then she moved. She went to the hidden hollow log by the creek. She pulled out her drawings. The wolf with Bernard's eyes, the clawed man, the girl in the dark. She gathered all of them. She did not take a horse. She did not make a sound. She slipped into the woods and began the long, cold walk to town. She moved like a shadow, her bare feet wrapped in rags. Her grief had burned away her fear. It had been replaced by something colder, something harder, a purpose. She arrived in town hours later, long after midnight. The streets were empty. The white church steeple pointed to the sky like a finger of judgment. The door was not locked. She walked inside. The church was dark, smelling of cold wax and old wood. She walked up the aisle, to the front. She did not go to the pulpit. She went to the pews where the good people of the town would sit, where Deacon Harris would sit, where Mrs. Peters, the store owner's wife, would sit. She laid the drawings out, one on each seat in the front row. The story, the wolf, the dark room, the terror, the truth. She left as silently as she had come. She was a ghost, and she had delivered her haunting. The next morning, the first of the town's faithful arrived for morning prayer. Mrs. Peters. She stopped. She saw the drawing on her seat. She looked at the others. She recognized the style. She had seen the child, Elsie, draw in the dirt. Her hand went to her mouth. She knew Bernard's father. She knew his reputation. She heard Deacon Harris enter.
"Mrs. Peters, what is it?"
She just pointed. The deacon looked. His face went pale. He quickly began gathering the drawings, but Mrs. Peters had already seen, and she would talk. The questions had begun. In the cold, dark cell, Eli sat on a foul-smelling cot, his ribs a chorus of pain. He had been here a day. Brody had not given him food or water. He was drifting in a painful haze when he heard a key. It was not Brody. An old man stood there, holding a lantern. He was thin as a rail, with a beard like tangled wire. He looked ancient. "You look like your father," the old man said, his voice a dry crackle. "Stubborn, and just as foolish." "Who are you?" Eli asked. "Name is Jedediah. I knew your PA, back in the war. He was a good man, but he always chose the biggest wall to bang his head against." He pushed a tin cup of water and a piece of bread through the bars. Eli seized them. "Why are you here?" Eli asked, after drinking the water in 3 gulps. "I was in the store. I saw what they did. I heard what Clay said. I know that family. I know what they are." Jedediah looked around the cell. "Your PA. He died for a cause that was not his. He thought he was free because he was fighting. He was just in a different kind of prison." "I do not understand," Eli said, his head thick with pain. Jedediah leaned closer, his eyes sharp. "This town, this is a prison. Son, that ranch is a prison. That girl, Lorna, she is in a prison. And you keep trying to break out. You are not thinking about what you need to break into." He tapped the wall. It was old brick, crumbling. "A man can break out of a place like this. A good wind could knock it down. But freedom is just another prison if you do not choose the right walls to be inside of. Your PA never learned that. He died free, and he died for nothing, all alone." The old man stood up. "I cannot help you, but I see your PA in you, and I hope you are smarter than he was." He left. Eli sat in the dark, the old man's words echoing in his head. Freedom is just another prison if you don't choose the right walls. He thought of Lorna. He thought of Elsie. They were his walls. Back at the ranch, Bernard was gone, having returned to town to make arrangements. He had taken Lorna with him, leaving Elsie alone at the ranch, ordering her to pack. Lorna was a ghost. She was housed with the Reverend, a prisoner in a pious house. Mrs. Pike, the Reverend's wife, was fitting her for a wedding dress. It was a heavy dark wool, a joyless thing. "You should be grateful, child," Mrs. Pike said, her mouth full of pins. "Mr. Clay is a saint, taking you in, after all the shame you have brought." Lorna said nothing. She was numb. She was doing this for Elsie. That night, she was left alone in a small, cold guest room. She could not sleep. She looked around. On the table was Mabel's Bible. It was the only thing Bernard had let her bring. She opened it, her fingers tracing the familiar, worn pages. She was looking for, she did not know, an answer, a sign. A letter fell out. It was folded thick. It was Mabel's handwriting. "My dearest girls, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I'm afraid. I have been afraid my whole life. I was afraid in Laramie. I was afraid of being shamed. I was afraid of Mr. Miller dying. I was afraid of Bernard. I let that fear rule me. I let it make me hard. I let it keep you locked away. I thought I was protecting you. I was just building a taller cage. Lorna, do not be me. Do not let shame be your master. The sin is his, not yours. It is his father's. It is this town's. It is not yours to carry, your life. It is the only one you have. Do not give it to him. I would rather see this ranch burn to the ground than see you in his bed. Choose love, not shame. Even if it is hard, even if it is the convict, even if it is nothing but the cold wind and a long road, choose your own life. Run. Do not let the fear win. I love you both. Be brave for me. Be brave in the way I never was. Mabel. Lorna read the letter once, twice. A fire, cold and sharp, lit inside her. The numbness broke. Her sacrifice. It was not what Mabel wanted. It was the one thing Mabel had begged her not to do. She stood up. She was no longer a victim. She was her mother's daughter. She walked to the door. It was not locked. She slipped out of the house. She did not know what she would do, but she would not be in that church tomorrow. She ran all the way back to the ranch, miles in the dark. She arrived, breathless, to find Bernard there. He had come back. He was drinking, furious. "Where were you?" he snarled. "I went to check on you. You were gone."
"I am not marrying you, Bernard,"
she said. He laughed. "You have no choice. Get out of my house." He grabbed her.
"This is my house."
A movement. Elsie. She was standing in the shadows of the kitchen.
"Elsie, run!"
Lorna screamed. But Elsie was not running. She was walking forward. Her face was calm. In her hand, she held their father's old straight razor. Bernard did not see her until she was on him. She moved like a snake. She put her small, thin arm around his neck from behind, and in the same motion, pressed the open razor to the soft skin under his chin. Bernard froze. He could feel the cold, sharp edge. Elsie did not speak. She did not have to. Her eyes, burning with a decade of silent rage, said everything. She would do it.
"Elsie,"
Bernard whispered, his voice shaking. "Elsie, put it down. Good girl."
"Elsie,"
Lorna said, her voice shaking but hard.
"No, not his way. Ours."
Elsie hesitated, the blade pressing just a little deeper.
"He is not worth it,"
Lorna said, grabbing her sister's hand.
"He is not worth the sin. We are not murderers."
Elsie looked at her sister. She held Bernard's life in her hand. With a shuddering breath, she let him go, shoving him away. Bernard staggered back, his hand to his throat. He was terrified. He looked at the two sisters, standing together. The mute girl with the razor. The defiant bride. He had lost. "Lock him in the pantry," Lorna said. Elsie, her face still hard, picked up the bar for the door. You cannot," Bernard sputtered. They will hang you." "They have to catch us first," Lorna said. They shoved him into the small, dark room. The room where he had locked Elsie. They barred the door. They could hear him screaming, muffled and small. "Now what?" Elsie whispered. Her voice, it was cracked, rough from disuse, but it was her voice. Lorna stared, tears welling. She grabbed her sister and hugged her. "We get Eli, then we run." They did not take their own horses. They took Bernard's fine black gelding, and the fastest of the ranch horses. They were stealing. They were outlaws. They rode to the edge of the property, to the old, abandoned silver mine. Lorna ran inside. She knew what she was looking for. She came out with 3 sticks of dynamite and a long fuse. They rode into town. It was the dead of night. They tied the horses in an alley. "The jail is old," Lorna whispered, her hands sure as she packed the dynamite against the weak, crumbling back wall of the cell. Mabel always said a strong wind would take it. "He is in there," Elsie whispered, pointing. "I know." Lorna set the fuse. "Go, get the horses ready. Get Bolo." Elsie ran. Lorna struck a match. The flame sputtered. She shielded it. She lit the fuse. It sparked. She ran. Eli was in the cell, his mind on Jedediah's words. When he heard it, the hiss, he knew that sound. He scrambled to the far corner of the cell, covering his head. The explosion was a monstrous, deafening roar. It blew the entire back wall of the jail into the street. Brick and wood and dust filled the air. The town bell began to ring. Shouts echoed. Eli stumbled out, covered in ash, his ears ringing, stunned. He saw her, Lorna, sitting on Bernard's gelding, holding the reins to Bolo, and beside her, Elsie, on the other horse. "Eli, come on," Lorna yelled. He was speechless. He grabbed Bolo's reins and hauled himself into the saddle, his ribs screaming in protest. "What? How?" "No time!" Lorna screamed. A window opened. Sheriff Brody, in his nightshirt, fired a pistol into the air. "They are! The jail! Stop them!" Lorna wheeled her horse. Elsie followed. Eli dug his heels into Bolo. The three of them thundered out of town, leaving the noise, the smoke, and the law behind. They did not ride south. They rode north, into the high, dark country, into the hard, unforgiving blackness of the mountains. They did not look back. They were three outlaws. They had no home. They had no future. They had only each other. They rode north, into the spine of the mountains. They rode until the horses were slick with sweat and their flanks were heaving. Eli rode with his teeth clenched, the pain from his ribs a white-hot fire that pulsed with every hoofbeat. Lorna rode with her back straight, her face set, as if she were riding to a coronation, not fleeing for her life. And Elsie rode with a new, terrifying stillness, the razor still clutched in her hand, her eyes scanning the dark trees. They rode for 2 days, pushing the stolen horses past their limits. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the wind and the altitude and the screaming fear did not say for them. They were outlaws. They were fugitives. They were, for the first time, free. On the third morning, Bernard's fine black gelding stumbled, its leg broken in a gopher hole. Eli put the animal down with a single shot, the sound flat and final in the thin mountain air. It was a sacrifice. The other 2 horses were nearly spent. "We have to go on foot," Eli said, his voice a raw rasp. He slid from Bolo's back, his knees buckling. "We cannot take the horses," Lorna said, her voice practical. "They are a trail, and we cannot feed them." Eli looked at his horse. Bolo. The only thing that had been his. He ran his hand down the horse's neck. A silent goodbye. He took the bridles off both remaining animals and slapped them hard on the rump. They trotted a few yards, confused, then stopped, looking back. "Go!" Eli yelled, throwing a rock. They bolted, disappearing into the pines. He watched them go. Another piece of his old life cut loose. "What now?" Lorna asked. Eli shouldered the saddlebags, which held the dynamite, a handful of ammunition, and a small sack of flour they had grabbed from the pantry. "Now we climb. We find a place where they cannot follow." They climbed for a full day, moving off any trail, following a frozen creek bed up into the high, hard rock. The air grew thin. The world was rock and ice and a wind that sounded like a mourning woman. Eli's ribs felt like broken glass. They found it as the sun was setting, painting the snow-capped peaks a bloody, impossible red. It was not a cabin. It was a ruin, an old line shack or trapper's hut, half crushed by a fallen pine. The roof was mostly gone, a gaping hole open to the sky. One wall had collapsed. "It is not much," Eli panted, dropping the bags. "It is enough," Lorna said. She looked at Elsie. "We will be safe here." The brutal winter set in. It was not a season. It was an enemy. The wind did not stop. It clawed at the flimsy patches they made in the walls, using pine boughs and mud and snow. They were trapped in a box of their own making, 10 feet by 10 feet. Their lives shrank. They became a simple, desperate routine. Survival. Eli was the one who faced the outside. His days were a loop of agonizing labor. He would leave before dawn, his pistol at his belt, the shotgun in his hands. He would check the snares he had built. Most days, they were empty. Some days, he found a frozen, stringy rabbit. Once, a porcupine. It had tasted like victory. He chopped wood. The axe handle, worn smooth, became a part of him. He swung it until his hands, chapped and raw, split open and bled. He did not care. The pain was a reminder he was alive. The pain was a fire that kept the cold from his mind. He would return at dusk, covered in frost, his ribs a dull, constant ache, and drop a rabbit or 2 by the fire. That was a good day. The sisters kept the inside. They became a single unit. They had one quilt, the one from Mabel's bed. At night, they slept under it together, curled against each other for warmth, their breathing in sync, They were the keepers of the fire, of the food. They stretched a single rabbit to last 3 days. First, the meat, boiled until it was gray. Then, the bones, boiled for a thin, greasy broth. Then, the bones boiled again. They gathered pine needles and boiled them for a bitter tea that kept the sickness away. They learned the landscape of their tiny prison. They learned the sound of each other's hunger. Silence became their language. There was no energy for words. A nod from Eli meant he had found food. A shake of his head meant another day of broth. Lorna would touch Elsie's hair. Elsie would mend a tear in Eli's coat. They were 3 animals in a den, waiting for the ice to break. Emotions simmered, hot and dangerous, beneath the ice of their survival. The tiny space was charged with things unsaid. The memory of Mabel, the explosion, the kiss in the barn, the other, lighter kiss. They were 3 people who had seen the rawest parts of each other. One night, the wind was so violent it threatened to take the roof. The cold was a physical, biting thing. Elsie was asleep, or pretending to be, her back to them, huddled under the quilt. Eli and Lorna sat by the fire. It was too small. They were feeding it sticks. Eli was staring into the flames, his face grim, his hands wrapped in rags. "Your hands," Lorna whispered. "They will heal," he said, not looking at her.
Let me.
She took his hand. He did not resist. She unwrapped the rag. The skin was broken. The blood dried black in the cracks. She took a tiny bit of rendered fat from a tin and began to gently, methodically, rub it into his skin. Her touch was firm, practical, like the night she had bandaged his arm.
I used to hate her,
Lorna said, her voice so quiet Eli barely heard her over the wind. He looked at her. What? Elsie. She did not look up from his hand. Not hate, resent. I resented her. All my life. She was the one who was broken. The one everyone had to protect. Mabel, me, even my father, in his own weak way. She was the one who got the soft voice, the extra blanket, and I was just the strong one. I was the one who had to hold everything. No one ever thought that I might be breaking, too. She finished with one hand and took the other. When she ran out, that night, when she saw us in the barn, I was so angry, I thought, even now, she is making it about her. Even now, I have to run after her. She finally looked up, her eyes bright with tears in the firelight. But when I saw her, in the snow, so small, I realized I was so busy protecting her. I never listened to her. I never saw her. I just saw the silence. I was just as bad as Bernard. I was just a kinder jailer. Eli said nothing. He just let her hold his hand. He saw her. He saw the strength she mistook for a flaw. I do not know what this is, Eli, she whispered. This, us, this cabin. I do not know what we are. We are alive, he said. Is that enough? He turned his hand over, his rough, broken fingers lacing with hers. For tonight, it has to be. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move. They sat there for an hour, just breathing. The fire burned low. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the barn. It was slow. It was tender. It was a woman choosing her one moment of warmth in a world of ice. He kissed her back, his hand moving to her face, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. It was a slow, unwinding, a confirmation. They were not Mabel's memory, or Bernard's victims, or the town's outcasts. They were just a man and a woman. He untied the ribbon that held her braid, his ruined fingers clumsy. She unbuttoned his rough shirt. By the low, dying embers of the fire, they made love. It was quiet. It was careful. It was an act of profound, desperate humanity. It was not about pleasure. It was about life. It was a promise, made in silence, that the world had not beaten them, that they were still warm. Across the small room, in the narrow cot, a sliver of firelight caught Elsie's open eye. She was turned to the wall, but she was watching. She watched them. Her face, as she had been for so long, was unreadable. She did not cry. She did not move. She just watched. The days that followed were thick with a new tension. Lorna was softer, but a shadow of guilt, or maybe just worry, crossed her face whenever she looked at Elsie. Eli felt confused. The act had bound him to Lorna, but he felt Elsie's gaze on him constantly. It was not accusing. It was measuring. 3 nights later, Eli was asleep. He had walked for 10 miles checking snares and had fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep on his cot near the fire. He woke, his senses instantly alert. The fire was almost out, the cabin lit by the blue, frozen light of the moon. He felt a warmth. He turned his head. Elsie was there. She had left the cot she shared with Lorna and was curled up on the floor beside him, her head resting on the edge of his cot, her hand touching his back. She was sound asleep. She was not seeking passion. She was not seeking what Lorna had sought. She was like a child, seeking warmth. She was seeking protection. She was seeking the safety of the man who had pulled her from the snow. Her touch was not lust. It was closeness. It was trust. He lay still, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. He looked at her small, pale face, so peaceful in sleep. He felt a profound, aching tenderness that was entirely different from what he felt for Lorna. It was the feeling he had confessed to Mabel, the desire to give her his voice, to take every blow. The quilt rustled. Lorna was awake. She was sitting up, watching them. Eli tensed, expecting anger, jealousy, betrayal. But Lorna's face, in the moonlight, was not angry. It was understanding. She saw it. She saw what he was, a shield. She saw what else he needed, a protector. She saw the truth of it. She held his gaze. She nodded. Just once, a silent acknowledgement. She stood up from her cot, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She was holding the quilt. She did not go back to bed. She walked over to them. She looked at her sister, sleeping, and at the man who was her lover and her sister's guardian. She lay down on the other side of Eli, pulling the quilt over all 3 of them. Eli did not move. He was in the middle, Lorna on one side, Elsie on the other. He could feel the warmth of their bodies, a strange, impossible sandwich of humanity. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. There was only the sound of the wind outside, and the sound of 3 people breathing. There was only the cold. There was only the shared pain. There was only the touch of hands, and the warmth of breath, and the silent, unspoken pact that they would not let the world tear them apart. They were a family, named only by the mountain and the dark, and they slept. The spring came like a pardon. The snow melted, running in small rivers down the rocks. The world turned from white to green. The thaw was dangerous. It meant travel was possible. It meant they were no longer safe. "He will come," Eli said one morning. He was cleaning his pistol. "He is not the kind of man to let this go." "He is not the only one," Lorna said. She was standing in the doorway, her face stronger, thinned by hunger but hardened by resolve. "Those men, Eli, the ones they will have families, friends, the town. They will call us murderers." "Let them," Elsie said. Her voice was still rough, a quiet rasp, but she spoke. She spoke when she had something to say. They had begun to make plans to move, to go further west. When they heard it, the sound of shod horses on rock. Eli was on his feet in an instant. "Lorna, the shotgun! Elsie, the back! Go!" He grabbed his pistol and peered through a crack in the wall. It was Bernard. His arm was in a sling. He was wearing his expensive coat, and he was not alone. There were 4 other men with him. They were not townsfolk. They were hard men, with rifles across their saddles and crossed cartridge belts. Bounty hunters.
Eli Hart. Bernard's voice was a triumphant sneer. I know you are in there. You and your two soiled doves. Come out. The law in Wyoming has a rope for murderers and thieves.
Eli looked at Lorna. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady on the shotgun. He will not take us, she said.
No,
Eli said. He checked his pistol. He had 6 shots. Stay low, away from the door. He did not answer.
He is not answering, one of the hunters yelled. He is in there. I see the smoke.
Burn them out, Bernard screamed, his voice high with rage. One of the men dismounted, a torch in his hand. He ran toward the cabin. Eli kicked the door open. He fired. The man with the torch grabbed his chest and fell. The world exploded in gunfire. Bullets tore through the thin cabin walls. Wood splintered. Stay down, Eli yelled. He fired again, at a man who was using his horse for cover. The horse screamed and fell. The man rolled, firing his rifle. Eli felt a sting, a burn in his side. He ignored it. He was a good shot. He was fighting for his walls. He aimed. He fired. The second man went still. He was down to 3 bullets.
They are reloading,
he yelled. He stepped out from the door, aiming at the third hunter. He fired. Missed. The hunter fired back. Eli felt it. Not a sting, a sledgehammer. It hit him in the chest, spinning him around. He fell back into the cabin, landing hard. He looked down, a dark, spreading stain. He could not breathe.
Eli!
Lorna screamed. He looked at her, tried to speak. He could not. His vision was tunneling. He collapsed.
He is down,
Bernard screamed in triumph.
He is hit. Now, go in. Get the women.
The 2 remaining men, Bernard and the last hunter, rushed the door. The hunter burst in, his rifle ready. Lorna was waiting. She fired the shotgun. The blast hit him square in the chest, throwing him backward out of the doorway. Bernard was right behind him. He stopped, horrified. As his last man fell, he looked up, his eyes wide. Elsie was there. She had come from the side of the cabin, silent as a shadow. She was holding the long, wood-handled skinning knife Eli used. Before Bernard could even raise his pistol, she stabbed him. She plunged the knife deep into his side, the side where his arm was in a sling. He screamed, a high, thin sound. He fell to his knees, dropping his gun. Elsie stood over him, the bloody knife in her hand, her face a mask of cold, righteous fury. Lorna was on him in a second. She kicked his pistol away. She grabbed the shotgun from where she had dropped it. She jammed the twin barrels under his chin.
Do not move,
she hissed. Bernard was gurgling, blood on his lips, staring in terror at the girl who had never spoken. Lorna, please, mercy. You know that word? Lorna said, her voice shaking. They heard shouting, horses. 3 men rode into the clearing. It was Jedediah, the old man, and Mr. Peters from the store, and another rancher Eli did not know. They were holding hunting rifles.
We heard the shots,
Peters stammered, his eyes wide, taking in the scene. The dead men. Eli, unmoving on the cabin floor. Bernard, bleeding, on his knees, with Lorna's gun at his head. Lorna looked at them. The witnesses. The ones who had arrived too late. You want to know what happened here? Lorna's voice rang out, clear and cold. You want to know why these men are dead? Ask him. She pressed the gun harder. Tell them. Bernard, tell them why you are here. Tell them about your father. Tell them about Elsie. Bernard was sobbing. I cannot. Wenna cocked both hammers. The click was the loudest sound in the mountains. Tell them. It was my father, Bernard shrieked, the confession tearing out of him. He hurt her. He hurt Elsie, years ago, and the town. They helped cover it up.
Pike, the sheriff, all of them, they helped. I just kept the secret, the papers, the guardianship. They were forged. I wanted her. I wanted to keep them quiet." He was hysterical, the truth and the blood pouring out of him. "Mr. Peters looked sick." Jedediah just nodded, his face grim. "He brought them here to kill us," Lorna said, her voice dead. "To silence us for good. Now you have heard it." Bernard looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Lorna, I am bleeding." Lorna looked at him, at the man who had destroyed her family, who had built her cage. She looked at the dead men. She looked at Eli, dying on her floor. She lifted the shotgun, turning it slightly. She fired. The blast roared, missing his head by an inch, spraying dirt and rock into his face. Bernard screamed, scrambling backward like a crab, clutching his bleeding side. "Go," Lorna said, her voice flat. "Run. Tell them. Tell all of them. Tell them what you did, and tell them what we did. You are ruined. Bernard, you have no name. You have no power. You are just a noise." Bernard staggered to his feet. He looked at the townsfolk, who stared at him with open disgust. He looked at the two women standing over their dead. He scrambled for his horse, hauled himself into the saddle, and fled. A wounded, humiliated, broken man, disappearing down the mountain. Lorna stood for a long second, the shotgun smoking in her hands. Then she dropped it. "Eli," she whispered. She ran back into the cabin, Elsie right behind her. He was on the floor, pale, his breathing shallow. The front of his shirt was soaked in blood. Elsie was there first, pressing her hands to the wound, her small face desperate. "He is alive," she whispered, looking up at Lorna. "He is alive. Help me." Eli did not die. He was too stubborn, and he had found, for the first time in his life, something he was not willing to leave. But it was a near thing. He drifted in a red, painful haze for what felt like an eternity. He had vague impressions of movement, of being carried, of the agonizing jolt of a makeshift travois. He remembered the smell of pine and the cold, sharp air. He remembered Jedediah's leathery face, looming over him, forcing bitter draughts of willow bark tea between his clenched teeth. "You drink this, boy," the old man's voice crackled, "or you will be seeing your PA sooner than you like, and he will be sorely disappointed in you." Mostly, he remembered the women. He remembered Lorna's hands, frantic and strong, pressing rags soaked in icy stream water to his burning forehead. He remembered her voice, a constant, low murmur of reassurance, sometimes to him, sometimes to Elsie, and he remembered Elsie's presence. She was a small, warm weight at his side. She never seemed to leave. He would wake from a fever dream, choking, and she would be there, her small hand on his arm, her eyes wide and dark, watching him, willing him to stay. Jedediah had led them away from the ruined cabin, away from the dead men. He had led them on a brutal 2-day journey, carrying Eli on a sled he built from pine boughs, following game trails and old, forgotten paths. He took them to a new valley, a place he knew, a small, high-altitude meadow cupped in the hands of the mountains. Inaccessible from any main road, it was sheltered from the wind and had a clean, fast-running stream. "No one will find you here," Jedediah had said, helping them move Eli into a shallow, dry cave. "The town, it is in an uproar. Peters and the others, they told the truth. They told what they heard Bernard confess. The man is ruined, but the law is still the law. And you, son, you are a jailbreaker and a killer in their eyes. You cannot go back, not ever." Jedediah left them with a rifle, a good axe, and a sack of salt. "I will be back when I can. Do not die." The nursing of Eli Hart became their new life. It was a crucible that burned away the last of their old selves.
Lorna was the hunter and the builder. She took Jedediah's rifle and taught herself to hunt, setting aside her fear, driven by a simple, primal need. Eli needed meat to heal. She brought back grouse and rabbit, and once, a small deer. She worked with a quiet, grim determination, her hands growing calloused and strong. Elsie was the nurse. She was the one who sat with him. She learned to clean the wound, her touch delicate and sure. She boiled the water. She steeped the herbs Jedediah had shown them. She spooned broth into Eli's mouth when he was too weak to lift his head. She was no longer the frightened bird. She was a small, fierce protector. For weeks, Eli lay on a bed of soft pine boughs, his life hanging by a thread. The bullet had torn through his chest, shattering a rib and missing his heart by an inch. The wound, packed with poultices of yarrow and moss, fought to heal. He fought the fever, and he fought the infection. One afternoon, the fever broke. He woke, and the world was not red. It was green. He was looking at the roof of the cave, and then at a face. Elsie. She was sitting beside him, mending his torn shirt. She was humming, a small, tuneless sound, the first sound he had ever heard her make besides a wail of grief. She saw his eyes open. She saw the clarity in them. The fever was gone. She dropped the shirt, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. "Eli?" she whispered. Her voice, it was real. It was soft, like brushed velvet, cracked from a decade of disuse. He tried to speak. His throat was a dry rasp. "Elsie!" She smiled, a brilliant, slow unfolding thing that changed her entire face. She put her small, chapped hand on his cheek. "You are safe now," she said. Each word was careful, a rediscovered stone. "We are all safe." He closed his eyes, the simple truth of her words washing over him. He was safe. He was not in prison. He was not on the run. He was home. He slept, and for the first time in his life, it was a true, healing sleep. When Jedediah returned a month later, he found a different world. Eli was sitting up against the cave wall, thin and pale, but his eyes were clear. He was carving a piece of wood. Lorna was skinning a rabbit, her movements practiced. Elsie was talking. She was telling Eli about a bird she had seen, her sentences short and halting, but real. Jedediah watched them for a full minute before he spoke. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "looks like I hauled all this medicine up here for nothing." Lorna looked up, her face breaking into a rare, open smile. She ran to the old man and hugged him, a gesture of gratitude that left him stunned and patting her awkwardly on the back. He is better," she said, pulling away. "I can see that," Jedediah said, his eyes on Eli. "You are tough, boy, just like your PA." "Thanks to them," Eli said, his voice still weak. "And to you, Jedediah, we would be dead without you." The old man grunted, embarrassed. He unslung his pack. "I brought news, and mail." He handed a letter to Lorna. Lorna stared at it. It was addressed to her. It had the seal of the circuit court. "What is this?" she asked, her hands trembling. "Bernard Clay is gone," Jedediah said, sitting by the fire. "He ran after you sent him off. He fled the county. His confession, the one Peters and I heard, it brought the whole rotten house down. Reverend Pike, he has been removed by the church. The sheriff, Brody, he is facing a federal marshal for corruption. The town, it is eating itself alive with the shame of it." Lanra opened the letter. She read it, her eyes scanning the page. "The church," she whispered, looking up, her face stunned. They have rescinded the marriage contract. They say it was made under false pretenses. And the debt, Bernard's father's records were seized. The debt was a lie. It was paid off by our father a decade ago. She looked at Elsie.
The eviction notice, it is void. The ranch, it is ours. We are free.
Elsie did not cheer. She just walked over and took Lorna's hand. Free. The word hung in the air, tasting strange. It is yours, Jedediah said, his face grim. But I would not go back. The town is free of Bernard, but they are not free of themselves. They are ashamed, and they will remember you as the ones who held the mirror up. They will remember the dead men on the mountain. You are free, but you are not welcome. Eli looked at Lorna. She read his mind. We are not going back, Lorna said, folding the letter. She looked around the small, high valley. This is our home now. They did not stay in the cave. With Eli's strength returning, they began to build. It was the hardest work any of them had ever known. Eli and Lorna felled the trees. He taught her how to use the axe, how to read the grain of the wood, how to swing with her whole body. She was a fast learner, tireless. They worked as a team, their motions falling into a rhythm, the sharp crack of the axe, the rasp of the crosscut saw, the thud of log on log. Elsie, whose small frame was not built for felling trees, became the architect of their home. She sealed the gaps with mud and moss, her small, clever hands working the mixture until it was perfect. She built the fireplace, fitting the river stones together in a tight, clean puzzle that drew the smoke up and out. They built a new homestead. It was not a half-collapsed ruin. It was a single, solid room, built from the forest itself, smelling of fresh-cut pine and curing mud. It was strong. It was their own. As the summer warmed the valley, their life took on a new shape. The rhythm of survival was replaced by the rhythm of living. Eli worked the land. He cleared a small patch of meadow by the stream. He did not have a plow. He did not have an ox. He used the pickaxe, the one from the grave, which Jedediah had retrieved for them. He broke the soil with his own hands, turning the earth, his body growing hard and lean. His prison pallor was gone, replaced by the dark tan of the sun. His scars remained, but they seemed older, part of a different man. Lorna planted a garden. Jedediah had brought her seeds, corn, beans, squash, potatoes. She found she had a gift for it. She talked to the plants, just as she had murmured to Eli when he was sick. She coaxed life from the rocky soil, her hands in the dirt, her face to the sun, the green. Living things were a testament to her hope. She had never been a jailer. She was a giver of life. Elsie, who had found her voice, found her art again. She did not sketch in secret. She did not draw her nightmares. She salvaged the smooth, white inner bark from fallen birch trees and flat, silvery pieces of barnwood Jedediah hauled up the mountain. She painted. She made pigments from crushed berries, from colored clay in the stream bed, from charcoal. She painted the valley. She painted the mountains, jagged and purple. She painted the small, strong cabin. She painted Lorna, her hands in the green garden. She painted Eli, his back muscled, swinging the axe. Her art was not about the dark. It was about the light. They were not lonely. They were solitary. They were a world of three, functioning in a silent, perfect partnership. They ate together. They worked together. They sat by the fire together in the long, peaceful evenings. The outside world did not exist. The town, the law, the men who had hurt them. They were ghosts, stories from a different life. There was only the valley, the cabin, the work, and each other. But the question remained. It was in the air, unspoken. It was in the way Eli's gaze lingered on Lorna when she came back from the stream, her hair damp. It was in the way Elsie would sit near him, not touching, but just close. They were a man and two women, living as one, and the shape of that was a thing they did not know how to name. One night in late summer, the moon was a perfect silver coin. It was so bright it bleached the color from the valley, turning the meadow to a field of frost. The air was warm, smelling of pine and the coming autumn. They were sitting outside. The fire had burned down to red coals. Elsie was the first to speak. She was looking at Eli. You will stay?" she asked. Her voice was stronger now, but she still used words carefully, as if each one was precious. Eli looked at her. He knew what she was asking.
"Not just will you stay the night, but will you stay?"
"I will stay," he said. Lorna, who had been staring at the moon, looked at him. Her face was half in shadow, her expression unreadable.
"What are we, Eli? I am not your wife. She is not. We are not what God understands."
She was afraid. After all the fighting, all the surviving, she was afraid of this. The quiet, the peace, the impossibility of what they were. Eli stood up. He walked over to where Lorna sat on the log. He knelt in front of her. "I was in a cell for 5 years. Lorna," he said, his voice quiet, rough. "And then I was in another, that town, that ranch, chased by Bernard, chased by my past. I was always running or caged." He looked at her, and he saw the woman who had kissed him in the barn, the woman who had fired a shotgun to save him. This is the first place I have ever been free." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of the cabin, or the grieving kiss of the barn. It was a kiss of deep, abiding, and quiet love. It was a kiss that said, "I am here." It was slow, and on the lips, and it tasted of wood smoke and a shared life. He pulled back. Lorna's eyes were closed, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Then Eli turned. He walked over to Elsie, who sat on the cabin step. She watched him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a deep, knowing intelligence. She was not a child. She was a woman who had seen the worst of the world and had survived. He did not kneel this time. He sat beside her. He took her hand. It was small, but strong. The hand of an artist, the hand of a survivor. "I will not choose," he said, his voice so low. Lorna had to lean in to hear. "I cannot. You two. You are not two halves of a thing. You are both whole." He looked at Lorna. "You are my heart. Lorna, you are my fire. You are the one who stands with me." He looked at Elsie. "And you are my soul. You are my quiet. You are the one who reminds me to be still, to be safe." He looked at them both, in the bright, impossible moonlight. "I will not choose between you. I will not leave one to have the other. I will stay, as long as you will have me, as your shield, as your man, as your partner. I will stay." Lorna was crying, silent tears for the impossibility, the sin, the beauty of it. Elsie looked at him. Then she looked at Lorna. Lorna finally spoke, her voice choked, broken. She was looking at Elsie, her living, breathing sister, and in her mind, she saw Mabel, the woman who had died for them, the other sister who had defined her life. "They are both my sisters," Lorna whispered. The words were a release, a confession of love, for the living and for the dead. She was accepting her whole life, the grief and the love, and she was choosing to stay in it. Eli did not move. He did not breathe. He waited. Elsie, the silent one, the one who had been a ghost for so long, smiled. It was a small, sure smile. She reached out her free hand, the one Eli was not holding, and she laid it on top of Lorna's. She looked at her sister. She looked at Eli. Their 3 hands, layered together on the step. That was the pact. In that silent moment, under the moonlight and the cold, unblinking stars, the 3 of them became something no town could name. They became something no church could bless. They became something the law would have condemned. But they chose it. They chose each other. They chose the walls of their valley, the walls of their home, and the walls of their shared, impossible love. They chose, finally, to be free. The story ends on a quiet morning, perhaps a year later, perhaps more. The cabin is no longer raw. There are curtains in the window, made from a flour sack. There is a stack of firewood, neat and high, by the door. A baby cries. The sound is not one of distress. It is a sound of demanding life. Inside the cabin, one sister rocks the cradle, a simple box of carved pine. She hums a low, soft tune. Outside, the air is crisp. The sun is just rising. The other sister and the man chop wood. The rhythm is steady, a shared labor. Thud, crack, thud, crack. One of them stops, wipes a hand on a brow, and calls out. The sister in the cabin calls back, her voice clear and happy. Love, finally, is not loud. It is not a declaration. It is not a fight. It is work. It is breath. It is a shared roof in a high, hidden valley. It is the sound of an axe, the smell of a fire, and the cry of a new life. It endures. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below to connect with other listeners. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel, and share your thoughts.